Fabulous, and this is Currents. Tonight, once again, Pope Francis is capturing the attention of the world. The Holy Father has granted an interview that's making headlines everywhere. Nearly all the news reports are focusing on the Pope's observation that today the Church risks becoming, quote, obsessed with social matters such as abortion, gay marriage, and the use of contraceptives. There is, however, much more to this historic interview. It is 12,000 words long, covering about 30 pages. So to help us sort it all out for you, tonight we're breaking from our regular format, and I am joined in our interview area by Monsignor Kieran Harrington. He's the Vicar for Communications of the Diocese of Brooklyn. Ed Wilkinson, our news director. Marie Elena Giassi, she's Currents education correspondent and Currents chief correspondent. Bill Delano, thank you all for joining us. I am fresh off of some oral surgery, but the news stops for no one, so we're going to get right to it. Let's begin. The interview reveals a pontiff who seems very comfortable with shades of gray, but one issue for him is pretty black and white. God is in everyone's life, the Holy Father says, even if the life of a person has been a disaster. Even if it is destroyed by vices, drugs, or anything else, God is in this person's life. You must try to seek God in every human life. That's a direct quote. Monsignor, isn't that what Jesus did when he walked the earth?
I certainly think so. And in fact, the Pope references the great Caravaggio painting of St. Matthew, where Jesus is sort of pointing at him, and he sees himself as St. Matthew in that image. And so I think that what this Pope is speaking to us about is a certain proximity. It's a proximity of the Church to others. Putting people really before theology is what's really going on here. And so I think that what you're seeing in Pope Francis is this intense level of intimacy with people. He's really becoming the world's parish priest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know what's happening? I mean, there's nothing new in what he's saying. I mean, there's always been the position of the Church about the dignity of the human person, but it seems to be a shift of emphasis, maybe. He's saying, let's not get caught up in some of these issues where that's the only thing that we think about. You know, he used the word obsessed, as you said, and he's saying the Church should be, bigger than that. Takes in a lot more issues, and the key to all of the issues is the dignity of the human person.
I think that's a very important point you make, Ed, is that he's not straying from anything that we have heard. And I think that's where people are kind of just like, is he changing church doctrine? Is he making these big changes? And that's not the case. And we're here now to kind of just make sense of that and put it in perspective. Maria Elena, your thoughts?
I think that the love of the individual person and the Church as a whole, I think the Pope is showing how much he loves the Church and trying to emphasize the love of God and the love that he has for the Church. And I don't think he wants us necessarily to forget about that. And I am not doing good. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's okay. These are the thing is, I think what you're displaying now is what a lot of people are displaying. We're having so much of a difficult time just explaining what he's saying because we don't want to misunderstand.
Right.
And that's why we're here today. What do you think?
Well, trying to read an encyclical, for example, is tough. They're complicated things, and we have.
Mm-hmm.
I found it interesting to see how the last two popes have sort of set the stage for this pope to come in. It almost seems like they teed up these incredible ideas, and this guy is this master, orator. I saw him at World Youth Day, and he's just an incredible speaker, and so he's able to just tee it off. And he's sort of articulating the work of the last 75 years. That's sort of what I'm seeing.
Now, in the Pope in the interview, he's asked about the meaning of the phrase "thinking with the Church." This is the next point of issue we want to talk about. Francis is our first Jesuit Pope. The words "thinking with the Church" come from St. Ignatius Loyola. He's the founder of the Jesuit order, as you all know. In answering the question, the Holy Father warns that thinking with the Church cannot mean only thinking with the Church hierarchy. The Pope says that the Church with which we should be thinking is the home of all, not a small chapel for select people, which is what we were really just talking about. Ed, now that certainly seems to be a warm, open-armed, much like Vatican II's emphasis that the Church not be this top-down organization, but the place for the people of God.
Yeah, well, again, this is nothing new. I mean, it's always been the teaching of the Church that Jesus left the authority of the Church with the people. It's called a sensus fidei in Latin, and it's not a new concept. It's the role of the hierarchy is to interpret what is that sense of the faithful. And so, I mean, the hierarchy should not be out there making rules just on their own. It's just that the hierarchy interprets, says, well, what does the church believe? What do the people of God believe as they're on this journey? And that's, you know, that's where it comes from. They don't get their authority. They're not talking just willy-nilly. They're talking about what is it that the people believe. So when the Pope says, you know, that the authority is there in the people, he means that the bishops and the clergy and everybody has to maintain close contact with the people. You know, this Pope, that's been a recurring thing. Walk among the people, be with the people, find out what they're thinking, you know.
Shake it up.
This is where it is.
He indicts himself, right? He accuses himself when he reflects on his own experience as a young Jesuit provincial of perhaps not being collegial. And he speaks then about how fruitful that collegiality was when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. And he speaks of a context of really a changing model of the church, the synod of bishops, consistories, not that these things should be taking place in sort of a ceremonial fashion, but there should be meaningful dialogue taking place. And so from my sense, when I take a look at what the Pope is speaking about, it's very clear he's a Jesuit, because what he's speaking about, the sensus fidelium, this is really about a spirit of discernment. And it's not necessarily about matters of church teaching, but he's really speaking about holiness of life, orthopraxis, as opposed to orthodoxy, is that we're called to a sort of a holiness of life, and we're on this journey, all of us one another.
Yeah, and in no way is he saying that the church has been wrong about abortion or birth control. He's just saying, let's not be obsessed with these issues. You know, maybe that's not the first thing when somebody has a problem. You know, if you have somebody who's hungry, you give them something to eat. You know, you don't stop preaching to them about abortion and birth control. I mean, I think that's what he's saying.
You have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
And when he speaks actually about the question of the gay person, he actually speaks about that in the context of confession. You know, he immediately, the second paragraph right after that, he starts to speak about the question of confession. And I think that what the Pope is really trying to say is we have to give people the opportunity to have the encounter with Christ. And sometimes our language is getting in the way of them having an encounter with Christ.
And here, I guess, is where we get into the more prickly aspects of what the Holy Father may have been trying to say. One of the more striking things that he did say was the dogmatic and moral teachings of the church, not all equivalent. He made the comment while discussing the issues that we were just talking about: abortion, gay marriage, the use of contraceptives. Now, the Pope says he's not spoken much about these things and has been reprimanded for that. But he hasn't spoken out because he worries that the church is becoming obsessed, again, his word, with these doctrines. So I ask you, Monsignor, do the Holy Father's words change any of the church's teachings?
No, I don't think that, again, they don't change the church's teaching. But again, his context is that we can speak about these issues. He's not saying we shouldn't speak about these issues. He's saying that there's a context with which we should speaking about these issues. And the context of that is salvation, the saving act of Jesus Christ, and what Jesus Christ has done for you and for me. He starts this whole interview with the question of, you know, who is Jorge Bergoglio? And his answer is very simple: I'm a sinner. This is how he starts, and he says this is not simply rhetoric. He says, who am I? I am a sinner. So the question, the starting point for the Pope, I think, is that what Jesus Christ has done for us, and we have to be careful that sometimes there are issues. What is the most important thing in our faith? What is ultimately our faith all about? It is what Jesus Christ has done for us, and we shouldn't allow issues which are really significant and have a great impact on our Christian living. They're really significant, they have a great impact on our Christian living, but they can't distract from getting to that first question, is who am I? I'm a sinner, and what Jesus has done for me.
Your thoughts on the reprimand that he hasn't addressed this issue, Ed?
Well, you know, you got to, again, it's the context. You know, he talks about the people of God, which is a solid Vatican II concept, and being on a journey of faith, you know. And it's like a group of people who are on a trip, and sometimes they go this way, and sometimes they go that way, you know. And he's saying you got to be ready to adjust your way. Read the signposts as you're coming to it. This signpost tells you you're going around a curve right now, you know. So he's saying, you can't put the lid on people. You can't stifle their creativity. You know, let them move, and then remind them once in a while, this way, that way. That's the way we go.
I think really when it comes to unity, I mean, how better? He was a pope who's elected to bring people together at a tough time for the church. when it comes to unity, what better way to unite people than to start off by saying, I'm a sinner?
Mhm.
You know, that is the first step.
Agreed.
And for him to start all of this off like that, then, like you were saying, you can have a conversation.
You know, you could sense that he is walking with people, and you know, he proves it when people write to him, that he picks up the phone and calls them. And so his proximity, his walking with someone, is he's walking with the woman who finds herself pregnant but unmarried, and who's and the father of her child is someone who's married and has abandoned her and wants her to have an abortion. It is the man whose brother has been murdered and he's angry and can't seem to forgive. It's the woman who's been raped by police officers in her home country and is struggling with the depths of despair. These are the people the Pope is responding to, is very close to, and I think it captures the essence of what we see him saying.
And Maria Elena, you and I have talked so much about the humanity of this Pope and how we just are so much closer to him, not to disparage at all any of his predecessors, but there is just something about Pope Francis that you gravitate to him. And you and I, we've talked about this at length, so please share your thoughts.
I think what Monsignor was saying, he relates to the people. And he meets people where they are, at what point in their life they're at, and he, you know, doesn't ask us, like he said, being a sinner. He doesn't say that we have to be perfect to go to church, to go to confession. God wants to perfect us, but we're all sinners, and he recognizes that, and he wants us all to come together and to worship together. And I think that comes through with him. It comes through in his eyes. It comes through the way that he calls people, like Monsignor mentioned.
And as Monsignor says, he makes these phone calls. I mean, he calls a woman who's pregnant. The first thing he says to her isn't going to be, "Don't have an abortion." You know, he's reaching out to her. He's saying, "Hey, how you doing? You know, let's help you out here." You know, and that's what he's
baptize
talking
your
to.
child.
There you go. You know, I mean,
He's interested
But I
in the
think
person.
the magic. Okay, so we wanted to have this discussion so that we wouldn't talk about the obsessed, quote unquote. He's done all these other words, right? I think the magic of a lot. I mean, for everything I've seen him speak about, he's able to capture your attention and speak to these core issues about love and forgiveness, which he's able to just bring people together around. And he's been able to be this Pope who's captured the world's imagination without speaking to these issues. He hasn't been mentioning them, and yet he's the guy everyone's talking about. And he's setting an example for a direction, I think, and so none of the issues are changing, and yet the emphasis is shifting.
He said, you know, he says very clearly, the teaching of the church is clear. And I'm a son of the church.
Right.
He just says, we just don't have to talk about all these things all the time. And he uses the reference of John the 23rd, and, you know, here's the thing, is some of you are parents. And he says so beautifully, he says, you know, John the 23rd sometimes speaks about turning a blind eye. That when you have children, you don't have to confront every time your child does something wrong. In some sense, you have to allow people the opportunity to make mistakes, to fail. Sometimes you turn a blind eye to what is taking place. And I think that he speaks about himself very much in the context of being a father. And I think that there is an element of his being a parish priest to all of us, is turning a blind eye to some things, because to confront gets in the way of entering into a deeper relationship with Christ.
I love this image that he uses in the interview. He says the church is like a mother who's taking care of her children, or it's like a father who's out doing his job, or it's like an old priest who can sit back and relax because he knows all the good that he's done. That's what the church is, you know?
A little bit to what Bill and Maria Elena were saying earlier today. Do you find that he has taken the art of evangelization to an entire new level? This Holy Father doesn't preach. He evangelizes, he teaches, he calls us to embrace the Holy Spirit. He doesn't push the Holy Spirit onto us. And do you think this is why people gravitate so much to this man? Because he's not beating us over the head with it?
It's the nature of being a Jesuit. Again, Jesuits are about the discernment of the Spirit. He's helping us all to discern where God is moving in our life. And you know, we started at the top of the show talking about how he speaks about God is in each of us. Whatever the desperate circumstances of our life are. And what he's calling us to do is to see how God maybe is moving even in the midst of the sinful circumstances of our life.
Okay, and here is where the genius of the Pope, Maria Elena, I'm sure you'll agree with me, comes to light. The Pope says, and I quote, "The feminine genius is needed wherever we make important decisions." He adds that the challenge is to think about the specific place of women in those places where the authority of the church is exercised. These are very powerful words from him. Maria Elena, well, we know the Pope is wise. this is proof positive right here. But what do you think he has? What do you think he has in mind with these statements?
I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I read through and I'm not exactly sure what he means, but
you agree how intense that he brings this up. Again, another topic that was once considered fairly taboo, but again, black and white, no shades of gray here. He's letting us know exactly what he feels about the role of women.
And I think he's affirming the essential role of women in the life of our church. And I think it's wonderful that he recognizes the gifts that women have given to the church, will continue to give to the church, and maybe we can find a way to better represent the feminine perspective in the decision-making process.
And Monsignor, I of course made the statement rather tongue-in-cheek, but it is a very serious topic in the church. It has been discussed to a great degree. Your thoughts?
Well, I think his remarks on the question of women, speaking about a theology of the feminine, is really necessary. Of course, that's in the context, and he speaks about it in the context of Mariology, of Mary, speaking about her being far greater than any of the apostles, right? So it's not about authority and power. In fact, he uses this notion of like feminine machismo. So it's not about what you do, so much as who you are, and we contribute in the life of the church not by what I do, but by who I am, and I think that's really important, because in America, especially, we have a context in which I have to produce, I have to do something, and my value is related to what I do, and I think what the Pope is trying to remind us is my value is related to who I am, and I bring to the life of the church all that I am. And I think especially the role of women then, the voice of women, who they are, how is it that we can come to decision making? I think it all probably moves in the direction much more of a collegiality.
Yeah. And again, when we talk about women, people go right to the women's priest issue. And this is what the Pope's saying. Let's not get hung up on these issues, Let's not talk about let's talk about this concept in a broader way, Excuse the expression, but that's what he's saying. He's saying let's not get hung up on these issues. Let's get into what we're really talking about.
I like that we've been able to discern what this is not about, and we've been able to clarify what this is about, which is a very important part of this forum. So we're almost out of time, though, so I just want a quick response from all of you. The Pope says he's living in Santa Marta House because the papal apartment is, quote, an inverted funnel. It's big, it's spacious, but the entrance he's talking about is really tight. People can only come in dribs and drabs. The Pope says, I cannot live without people. What are your thoughts, really quickly? Let's just start with you.
I think
Bill.
It's really just another step, a huge step forward to a bigger hearted church, just with a big heart.
I agree. Maria Elena?
I agree. I think he loves to be around people. We've seen that at World Youth Day. He loves to be around the youth.
With the thousands gathering in the square, he flourishes. He flourishes with that. You're absolutely right, Ed.
Well, he tells the bishops to be among their people, so he's leading by example.
He speaks about how when he was in the seminary, he was first in the diocesan seminary, and he recognized the need for community. That's what drove him to the Jesuit fathers. And I think that's what he's really trying to share with all of us, is that the church is about community on one level. The second thing I think which is really important about the papal apartments, and it's really significant, is Pope Francis is not going to have access to him controlled. That basically people are very accessible. He is very accessible to them, and they are very accessible to him. And I think that's why we see a sort of a springtime in the church with his papacy.
All right, gentlemen and lady, it has been an extreme pleasure. Thank you so very much. I really enjoyed our discussion. And coming up next, the leader of the Catholic Church in Brooklyn and Queens, Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio, on the Holy Father's governing of the church as Currents continues. Continuing our coverage of Pope Francis and the Church, we now turn to the leader of all Catholics in Brooklyn and Queens, Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio. In tonight's edition of Into the Deep, the Bishop and Ed examine some of the steps the Holy Father is taking to reform the Vatican.
Bishop, good to see you again. Big news in Rome a couple of weeks ago when the Holy Father chose a new Secretary of State. And a lot of people are saying now that this is going to usher in a new way of governing the Church over there in Rome. Do you have some insights on that? Do you know the new Secretary of State?
Well, I've met him, I think, once. He was in the Secretary of State. He was number 2 there. And had a good reputation, being very efficient. It seems that there will be some division of labor. The Secretary of State has two responsibilities. First, the external affairs of the church, the representation of the Holy See to countries, all the nuncios who also have double work. They are the political responsibility to the countries, but they also represent the Holy Father to the church. They process all of the church matters, the selection of bishops, and the most important thing, and many other things. So too with the Secretariat of State. The Secretary of State has two sections. One is the external one, the foreign policy, foreign relations, and the other is the internal affairs of the church. It seems, the rumor is at least, that there will be somebody else appointed with somewhat equal responsibility for the internal affairs, kind of like a chief operating officer. Mm-hmm. In the past, the Secretary of State really filled that position and had two deputies, one that did one side and one the other. But it may be that it's such a big job that somebody just has to concentrate on the internal and somebody in external affairs.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there are all these rumors and guessing about why this Holy Father was elected, and one of the things was that he was brought in to reform the Vatican Curia, and this certainly seems to be a step in that direction. That so responsibilities are being divided up, and maybe there's a new vision of how he sees working with the Curia there and what their responsibilities are going to be.
Yeah, I think so. We had a document called Pastor Bonus back in, not sure, it's about at least 15 years ago now, under John Paul, mm-hmm. which was a reform of the Curia. They put new procedures in, etc. One of the interesting ones that the dicasteries, and that's what the offices are called, should periodically meet with one another, and then they had a provision for interdicasterial committees. Now, you would think that was a normal thing, but that was unheard of. So that document itself was rather revolutionary. Unfortunately, it did not seem to really last too long in its implementation. Mm-hmm. So they're not talking to one another. You have silos. We have this in our own diocese. One group doesn't talk to the other. So it's nothing new. It's human nature. Everybody's worried about their own thing and doing it. So probably there needs to be another, it's not even a reform, but even the implementation of Pastor Bonus would bring us further along. And the other major problem I think most dioceses would see with the Curia is that they, there's the complaint they're not responsive to our needs, or they don't respond quickly to information that we send or letters that we send. That's an ongoing problem. I don't know how that can be resolved, but that is some criticism that might be leveled. Mm-hmm. Again, it's difficult in a busy church, international church, to deal with everything quickly. So mm-hmm. People need patience, perhaps, but that's some of the criticism that we hear, and we'll see how they can ameliorate the situation.
Departure of Bishop Caggiano to Bridgeport as the new bishop up there, I would think that does that signal that maybe some of his responsibilities will be divided up into different sections also, because he had an awful lot on his plate here.
He did. Well, we need to choose a new vicar general, but there's another position which is called the Mater of the Curia. Many times it's the same person, but sometimes it can be divided, and that is basically what I'm thinking of, dividing up those responsibilities so that some other person with less episcopal responsibilities might be able to do the moderation of the Curia, which is basically like a chief operating officer. Mm-hmm. So the details of all of the other departments would be handled separately. So that's basically what I think we're going to.
Right. So more to come on that, huh?
More to come.
Okay. Thanks for being with us today.
Okay.
And as Ed mentioned, Brooklyn native Bishop Frank Caggiano is now the leader of the church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Chosen by the Pope, the bishop was installed in his new post yesterday. Currents provided special live coverage throughout the day, with Ed and Bill reporting live from the scene in Connecticut. Once the service wrapped up, Ed caught up with many of the bishop's friends from Brooklyn, and then the celebration continued into the night.
So this is the big day. This is the day Bishop Caggiano will be installed as the Bishop of Bridgeport, Connecticut. And the people from Brooklyn and Queens are delighted to be here. There's a healthy delegation from Brooklyn and Queens.
What do I think? Oh, it was first of all very beautiful. And he preached
Tremendous homily. It was very good.
The entire liturgy was fabulous. I've never experienced something so joyful and so peaceful and prayerful. Everybody was just delighted to be here.
I think it was just very humble and very solemn. It was very beautiful.
What are your reactions to the ceremony today? It was very beautiful.
It was very beautiful and joyful. And the way that Bishop Caggiano has been received is expressing the love and the great faith of these people in Bridgeport.
I think that he is the fulfillment of his homily about being a bridge builder. I think he's going to be a great bridge builder. That's really at the heart of being a bishop. So I think he's going to do so wonderfully well here.
Okay, so here we are at the after party for Bishop Caggiano. We're celebrating his installation as Bishop of Bridgeport. And I'm with Deacon Carlo Malachi from Brooklyn, and you worked with Bishop Caggiano.
Yes, I have been. Yes, I have been.
What are you going to miss most about Bishop Caggiano?
Well, his openness. He's making you comfortable.
He's a wonderful priest, and don't make me cry now, okay? Because I'll start crying. He's a great loss to our diocese. And I told the people in Bridgeport they better treat him well, okay? Or Brooklyn will be after him.
What do you think are the strongest personal qualities that he had that we're going to miss as a diocese?
His kindness, sense of humor, concern for others, always trying to help somebody else out and never thinking in terms really of himself.
Great. Thank you. And so from Trumbull, Connecticut at the after party for Bishop Caggiano, I'm Ed Wilkinson for Currents, and we're going to enjoy the rest of the party now.
Oh, he will be missed. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We leave you with Bishop Caggiano as he leaves St. Teresa Church after celebrating the Mass of his installation as the Bishop of Bridgeport. For the entire Currents News team, I'm Liz Faublas. Have a good night and a very good weekend.